Hi, I'm Kristen of Woollypetals, and this is my Sardine Pillow step-by-step instructional video. If you found this video just perusing YouTube or by coming to my YouTube channel, you can purchase the pattern in my Etsy shop because you do need printed pattern pieces to make the sardine pillow. You can find the link in the description or search Woollypetals Sardine Pillow on Etsy. The sardine pattern comes with 3 files. It is the instruction file with, I believe, 10 or 11 pages, and it has written instructions on how much fabric you need, how to plan out your sardine, what to cut, and then step-by-step sewing instructions with pictures for each step. It also comes with 2 pattern piece files. One is the 36-inch size, which is this guy, and one is the 24-inch size. They are sewn identically. Is that a word? They're sewn exactly the same, just the size of the pieces is different. So you will want to make sure you download both those files, or at least the file for the size you want to make. This video will walk you through the Sardine options. Then I will take you to an overhead view of how to prepare the pattern pieces for use, as well as just explaining them a little bit. And then the overhead view will happen for cutting out your sardine as well, where I go over a few different options. And then we will work on prepping different parts for sewing and sewing up your sardine. Then once your sardine is sewn, we will turn it and stuff it and sew up that last hole from the stuffing, and you'll have a fully sardine pillow. So you can follow along with your pattern or watch this video first and then use the written instructions in the pattern to remind you of what you need to do. I also have timestamps in the pattern for each section, so if you need to be reminded of something, you can just jump to that timestamp. So let's talk about the sardine options. This is on page 5 in the pattern. And before you get to the sardine options, page 3 gives you cutting tips, just some things about when you're cutting fabric right side up or cutting fabric in reverse. And it has some images of cutting out the pattern, as well as when you have to combine 2 of the pattern pieces to cut out one of the options. And then page 4 gives you a little overview of the patchwork that I did, and I will talk about that briefly here as well. But let's get into the options. Option 1 is the single fabric sardine. Actually, before we do that, you do have to decide 2 things. One is if you're making a 24-inch or a 36-inch sardine, and then you want to kind of prep those pattern pieces for which size you're going to do. Maybe you're going to sew both of them at one time, and the next section will kind of help you figure out how to prep those pattern pieces. After you know what size you're going to make, you have to decide if you're doing a one-sided sardine or a two-sided sardine. And what that means is if you do a one-sided sardine, one side of your sardine will be pieced in some way, because there's several different options, and the back of that sardine will be a single fabric. So you have a pieced side and a single fabric side with no eye, and that's a one-sided sardine. No matter what pieced front it is, as long as it has a single fabric back, it's a one-sided sardine. And there's a two-sided sardine. So if you have a pieced front and then you have the same pieced back, that's a two-sided sardine. You could also have a single fabric sardine on both sides. Like, this is not both sides, but you could have just the one fabric on both sides. The reason this matters is because of how you cut out your sardine fabrics. The pattern itself is printed so that all of the piece patterns are flowing in one direction, and then the single fabric pattern piece is flowing in the opposite direction. So therefore, you can just lay those pattern pieces right on your fabric with both of them fabric and pattern piece right sides up, cut them out, and you're good to go for a one-sided sardine. If you're doing a two-sided sardine, you will take whatever pattern pieces you're using to create the look you want, and you have to cut those out 2 times per pattern piece. But one of those has to be in reverse or a mirror image, because this way it goes with the nose pointing that way. When you turn it around, it's opposite. So if you cut out 2 pattern pieces, both sitting right side up on the fabric, they would be going in the same direction and you wouldn't be able to make the sardine pillow. So you have to either fold your fabric in half with right sides of fabric together, lay your pattern piece on top, and cut out 2 pieces at once, or you lay your fabric right side up, you place your pattern piece right side up, cut out 1 piece, then you move your pattern piece down on the fabric, but turn it over, like wrong side facing up, and cut out another piece. And that will give you the pattern pieces you need in mirror image. So no matter what you do, for a one-sided sardine, you cut the pattern pieces out as they are. For a two-sided sardine, you need to cut one of the 2 in reverse. The pattern shares that, and I talk about that when you're cutting out fabric later in the video as well. The options, let's go through those. You have a single fabric sardine, so you're just using the full body pattern piece and cutting that out. Cutting out one-sided, you do 2 of those actually, because one side would not have an eye. And if you're doing two-sided, you would just have an eye on both sides. That one's the only one that's a little bit different because it has no piecing. The next option is the body with head. So this is by combining the 2 body pattern pieces with temporary like washi tape. You can create a body pattern piece that attaches to the head pattern piece. So you have 2 pieces on your sardine. And if this is one-sided, it has a solid back, so you use the large full-size pattern piece. If it's double-sided, you would cut each of these out twice, one in reverse for each. The last option is the fully pieced body. So that is the top body and the belly and the head. These are the 2 pieces that you would tape together to make the full body piece, or the body with head piece, I guess. If you are doing this option one-sided, you would cut out all 3 pieces, and then you would cut out the full body piece back, single fabric back. If you're doing it double-sided, you'd cut out 2 of each pieces, 1 in reverse of each. That is the only option that you can use the flipper for. The flipper goes in the seam between the top body and the belly piece. It is 1 pattern piece, but you cut it out 2 times, once in reverse per flipper. So if you do have a 2-sided sardine, you would cut out 4 flipper pattern pieces, 2 in reverse. If you have a one-sided sardine with a flipper, you only need to cut out 2 pieces, 1 in reverse. The other option is the top fin. This can actually be added to any sardine, single body sardine, double-sided sardine, pieced whole sardine with head, any option. I probably got all of those wrong. The top fin requires 2 pieces cut from the pattern piece, 1 in reverse. And you can, again, add that to any sardine. Each option in the pattern underneath tells you what to cut for one-sided or two-sided. So this may be more complicated than it appears. Trying to explain to you a pattern without questions back so you get full comprehension, that's kind of tricky. So if you're doing a 36-inch, you use the 36-inch pattern. If you're doing the 24-inch, you use the 24-inch pattern. I just want to talk real quick about quilting and patchwork before you move on to your pattern preparation and cutting. Patchwork, on page 4 in the pattern, I have a section sharing this patchwork for the 36-inch as well as one that I have made for a 24-inch sardine. And I just put squares on point. I share how many squares I use for each size. I share how many rows to make with how many squares in each row. And then you can use the pictures to lay out all the squares and rows and sew them together. If you want to do any other sort of patchwork, I recommend taking your pattern piece, laying it flat, and whatever patchwork you want to do, lay it out on top of your pattern piece, remembering that the seam allowance as you sew it up will reduce the size, so you probably need to make it a little bit bigger, and patchwork a panel that you can cut your pattern piece out of. If you want to make the whole sardine patchwork, you would be fine making about a 10-inch by 37-inch patchwork panel and cutting that piece out of that size patchwork panel. If you want to do any quilted options, this is what I recommend. First, I recommend thin batting or a layer to a flannel. I do not recommend thick batting for this because none of your other pieces are going to have batting behind them, so it will skew things, as well as it'll probably change the shape of your sardine a little bit because the thickness just changes things. So thin batting, flannel is great. I would recommend quilting your fabric and then cutting your pattern piece out of that fabric. The only exception, I did this one hand quilted, and I was very careful not to pull my stitching tight, and I was able to keep, with thin batting and loose hand stitching, keep it from shrinking. But quilting does often shrink fabric, so making a little bit larger panel than your pattern piece, quilting it and then cutting your pattern piece out of it is what I would recommend to do. I think that's everything. Fingers crossed. The next thing that you're going to see is me taping together the pattern pieces and cutting it out and sharing that, and then we'll move into cutting the pattern out and getting it sewn up. So happy sewing. I love to see what you make. Please feel free to send me a picture on Etsy, to post on social media, use the hashtags, or tag me on social media posts. I'm really only on Instagram. I do have a Woollypetals Facebook page. So really, I do not mind at all, and I really do love to see what you make. So please share. You can see here, I have the full 36-inch pattern printed out. May look slightly different if there are any tweaks after the testing process. With tape or glue, you are going to tape pages together, and how you're going to do it is you're just going to take that dotted line and put it directly on top of the other dotted line for the page that you want to be next to. And I like to pay attention to the lines going out as well. And then you're just going to tape. Regular Scotch tape works, washi tape works, even glue works. So you're just going to do that to connect them all. I'll show you what glue. Oops, I got a little glue off my page. That was a lot of glue, but with the lip of my cutting board there, it's a little bit tricky. So that's glue, which works great too, and then doesn't have the tape in the way. If you ever have pages that lip too much on the back, you can tape or glue the back. But I typically use tape the most. Glue is probably more economical. So once you get your pattern pieces fully connected, and you might notice that I am only taping over the pattern area. Like, I don't need to tape over here because I'm just going to cut those away, be in the background. So I just wanted to mention that you will not need to tape page A to page B. Page A has the headpiece there, and there's no need to tape it to another piece, as well as you don't need to tape any of the top row, page A through page E, to the bottom row, page F through page J. You really only need to tape together the pages that say tape to a different page so that those actual pattern pieces are all connected. So let's talk about the pattern pieces for a quick minute. We have the full body pattern piece along the bottom section, and it notes the eyes on that piece as well as the head piece. Those are not to cut out, those are just there for alignment of the eyes on the pattern. The eyes you will cut out are these two circles here, and they are labeled. I also have the flipper on the belly piece as well as the flipper you're going to cut out. The flipper shown on the belly piece is just for alignment, and it is a little bit smaller than the actual flipper pattern piece because it's supposed to denote the flipper after it is sewn, so the seam allowance is gone. And you can only add the flipper to the belly piece. So if you're doing a fully pieced body, you cannot add the flipper to any other option. So you may have noticed that the pattern pieces are printed in reverse to each other. As in the full body piece on the bottom is printed in reverse to the head, top body, and belly piece on the top, which makes it easier for cutting out a one-sided sardine. As you know from earlier in this video, the one-sided sardine has a single fabric back and then some sort of pieced front. And so to cut those out, you're just going to lay all those pieces right side up on fabric that is right side up and cut them out. If you are making a two-sided sardine, you will need to cut out two of whatever pattern pieces you are using. So how you would do that is you can either fold the fabric in half, lay your pattern piece on top of it, and cut out two pieces at once, or you can cut out one right side up on right side up fabric, and then flip your pattern over, leaving your fabric right side up, and cut out a second piece. And that would be for each piece you are using. So if you're making a single fabric full sardine, you would just use the full body piece. If you're making a head and body sardine, you would cut out two head pieces, one in reverse, and you would tape the belly piece to the top body piece with washi tape and cut out two body pieces. Or you can piece with all three sections, the head, the top body, and the belly piece, and cut them out of the corresponding fabrics, one regular and one in reverse. So that will be a little bit to understand in the cutting section of the video, but I just wanted to mention it here. So next I wanted to share the 24-inch pattern pieces. On page E, there is a little layout of how the pages are taped together. And it's just a little bit different than the 36-inch because there's only 4 pages per row. But pretty much other than that, it's the same. You're going to glue or tape the correct pages together. They're noted on the pattern what page to tape to what. You can look at the little diagram, or it's pretty easy to figure it out. Again, you do not have to tape the page A to anything, and you don't have to tape the top row to the bottom row, only attaching the patterns where they're needed so that you have the full pattern piece. So I thought I would cut out the belly and the top body pieces because we need to show you how to tape those together for part of the pattern. So I am cutting out with my paper scissors. I don't recommend using your fabric scissors. I also want to be consistent with the way I'm cutting everything out. That means that if you are cutting down the center of the black line or cutting just on the outside of the black line so the black line is left, or cutting so that the black line is gone from the pattern piece once you cut it out, any of those are fine. The line is not big enough to change the pattern, how it aligns, but you just be consistent. Do all your pattern pieces the same. It can take a few minutes to cut everything out. So we're going to do a speed run on that real quick, and we'll be back to talk about how to attach the pieces for the head plus body option. So I have my two pieces cut out, the top body piece and the belly piece. This is the option we're going to be talking about for a minute. It has a head and one fabric for the whole rest of the body, which is a little bit different than the fully pieced body fish like this one. This one has the top body piece and the belly piece separate fabrics, plus the head is a separate fabric. So in order to make the body with head option on the bottom here, we have to connect the top body and the belly piece. So to do that, we're just going to use washi tape. I like washi tape because it is easy to remove. Sometimes when I pull it off the pattern, it does remove some of the markings, but it does pull away from the paper so much easier than like Scotch tape. And you can also pull it away and then just trim off the edge of the washi tape. But I don't want to print out two copies of these pattern pieces, so using washi tape to attach them and detach them is how I do it. You want to lay the top body piece on top of the belly piece and align the top body piece bottom edge with the line that is on the belly piece. And you kind of just want to overlap them. There's like a little angled corner on the right hand side, and aligning that top body piece on top of that and placing it there with washi tape holds it together and gives you the single pattern piece that you will need for the body with head. So I already cut out a 24-inch because I wanted to have two different options to make during this video, or at least show you the couple different things. And that will be that the 24 inches one-sided that I'm going to make. So I cut out already a full body back, and I'm taking the pins out here. So I unpinned it, and you can see the fabric, the pattern was laid on the fabric right side up and cut out just like that. So that is my back for my 24-inch sardine. And then I have the same thing with my body pieces and my head piece, because they're pieced, that they are laid out, oops, one more pin, right on top, right sides facing up on both of them, and cut out. Same with this one. Right sides facing up and cut out. And so because the pattern is in reverse of because the pattern is printed in reverse, they are going to be the opposite to each other. So that if I wanted to put them right sides together now, they're not sewn, so that's tricky. They would align on top of each other. I also have a headpiece, and again, that is going to be right sides. And then I cut out a top fin, which is two pieces. This fabric was not directional, and I actually did the same fabric as the back, which is my own fabric that I have on Spoonflower. It's Woollypetals Starry Sky. Man, it's like sticking together. So that fabric was put right sides together and cut out. And then I have my flipper that is the same, right sides together. Again, if this was directional fabric, I would not do that. So I have two mirror images pieces for my flipper. If you're doing a double-sided sardine, like I'm going to do for the big one, you will cut out 4 flippers, because you need one flipper for each side, and one flipper is made of 2 pieces. So the only thing I haven't cut out for the little guy is the eye. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how I actually cut out now. I just wanted to show you those pieces. I will be sewing parts of that in with the big pattern so that you can kind of just see the difference. And also, when we get to the point where the front is fully pieced and we're attaching it to the back, that will be a good view of a one-sided sardine, where the big one is going to be two-sided. So I am going to switch you to an overhead view again so that we can view my cutting mat, and I can cut out a sardine pillow that is fully pieced body and double-sided, two-sided. I keep saying double single-sided, but in the pattern I put one-sided, two-sided, so I apologize if I am messing up my terminology here. So let's flip you down. I'm just gonna pop this over here real quick so you can see that again, it is printed in reverse. We will not be using this piece because we're making a two-sided sardine, so we can put that away for now, but we do need all of our other pieces. These are my fabrics for this pattern. This is going to be the sardine pillow top body piece. I always recommend ironing. I know it's really easy not to, but because we are matching our back sardine section to our front sardine section when we're sewing the whole pillow together, we want it to be as smooth as possible. And sometimes those seams that are in there, sometimes those creases that are in there off the bolt can really hinder the pattern making. This one isn't too bad because it is pretty new fabric. I haven't had it for very long, but like, look at this one. This one has been in my stash for a little bit, and it has some pretty big creases. So really, really, really recommend ironing your fabric. Okay, so we're gonna cut out the top body piece first. And you may have a smaller piece of fabric to work with than this. This is a full yard of fabric. So this fabric is not directional. It almost could be directional, but because if you look closely, there are some flowers and bunnies. But if you really look around, there's bunnies upside down to me, but right side up there. So to me, it's fully non-directional, which means I can just fold it in half, right sides together, and lay my pattern piece on top of it and cut it out. So what I want to do at that point is just kind of scoop my fabric. So I'm using as little as possible. So this little section I'll cut off. I'll probably put in my scrap bin because it's a little bit larger. I use pins to pin my pattern down. This is a very long pattern, so while it might seem fine just to pin at two ends, this will bubble up if you do not put pins in the middle. So this is what I do. I pin it and then I cut it. There are a couple different ways you can do this. You can do just like I did and pin and cut. You can use pattern weights because it's such a large pattern. Instead of pinning, these are weighted, so they'll hold the pattern down for cutting or for tracing. You can use any sort of marker, pencil, fabric pin to mark out the pattern onto your fabric. Then you can remove your pattern and cut out on that line. It will be in your seam allowance, so you could even technically use a Sharpie and do it. Just make sure the line is visible. This is darker fabric, so a lighter marking line would be ideal. And if you're marking your pattern on and then taking your pattern off, I would still pin it in place so that your two layers stay together. If it's just a single layer, don't worry about it. But if it's two layers, I would definitely pin your fabric layers together so they don't shift. I am just going to cut out like this. I just kind of help guide with my finger to keep that pattern down and as even as possible. Like if it pops up a little bit, it will skew the shape. So you want to keep the pattern pressed against the fabric so you're not cutting it too big or too small. Take it slow. If you're not used to cutting out paper patterns, figure out which side works better for you. If going along this edge so that the fabric is to the left of your scissors, or going this way is easier. You might note a difference if you're right-handed or left-handed. If you're used to cutting out patterns, I don't know that there'll be a need to do one over the other for you. that's all I need from this fabric. So we're gonna take the pins out. Just take a look real quick. There's our pattern. You can see it is exactly the same. And then we are going to lift this up, and we have two mirror images of each other. If you put them next to each other, they're mirror images, one on top of the other. If you place them right sides together again, they are mirror images. So that's what we want when we're making a two-sided sardine. The other thing I want to note on here is how you place the pattern on the fabric. And for this one, not super necessary, but we're going to go into our bottom piece, and it's a little bit more necessary to keep an eye on how you lay the pattern on the fabric. I will have, they're not on this one, but I've added them to my pattern. I will have arrows on the pattern, one or two places that help you note the grain of the fabric. And I'll show you why that's important, or could be important to you. Let's pop that up higher, and let's do this one. The belly piece is what we are cutting out next, and it is a directional fabric. I picked it specifically because you could see what we can do with directional fabric. If I just folded this over and put my pattern on top, one of these would be, the fish would be upside down. This fabric you could almost get away with, but not quite, in my opinion. If you don't mind about directional fabric, don't worry about it. So my tendency, because I like to save fabric when I'm cutting, is just to like line up the top edge as close as I can. But if I was doing that, my fabric, then this ends up here. When I cut it, my fish are going back and forth because it's directional. They would be kind of off, like on an angle. It would be more like this. Again, this isn't the best fabric maybe for that, but because it can look very odd if you have a very vertical pattern, that's what the arrows are there for. And like, so it feels a little bit more wasteful, but you can use this fabric for something else. This is how you want to align it so that the arrows go with the grain of the fabric. And because this is a directional fabric, but I can't fold it over, I'm gonna, before I pin that on, loosely cut out a piece. And you could go ahead and cut out that actual pattern piece and then flip it over and cut a second one out. But this is a little bit easier because you only have to cut out one. I'm going to lay that fabric on top of that. And the only problem with that, and it's not a problem, but I just want to note for this video, I have to flip my pattern over because of the way that I cut it out. We could almost make it actually. Yeah, we can make it. So you could have just, because we're cutting out two of the same, just flipped it over. You can see there that actually fits a little bit better. So let's do that, because then we can zhuzh our fabric up to save a little bit more there. Again, only flip your pattern over like this if you're cutting out two of the same fabric, so you have a mirrored image. If you were only doing one fabric, you wouldn't have that problem. It's just the way the fabric cut, and then I had to flip it over. So pinning in place again. So we're taking that off. I'm going to flip it over because that's the way the pattern is, right sides up. And same with this one. But let's take these down. So we've got those two pattern pieces, and they're not going to line up perfectly because they're pieced and it's a curve. So one has to be slightly larger than the other. And then we've got the ones that are wrong side up or in reverse if you turn them right side up. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So I'm reiterating this a few times because I just want you to not accidentally cut out two pieces that are both going in the same direction and have to waste more fabric or not have a use for that. So just something to keep in mind. Now I'm just gonna put all of these. I kind of like to keep them together with a pattern piece. It's pretty easy to visibly note where these go, but that's always a nice thing to keep them together. Okay, next we have the head, and this fabric I can fold over and not worry about direction or anything. So I'm just gonna kind of fold it over. I am trying to keep my lines even so that once it's sewn, I'm pretty sure those lines will line up. And let's actually try on this one, marking around it. And usually if you hold the edge of the pattern down, you can just kind of drag your pin around that edge and it's really easy. Like it doesn't, you don't have to be good at drawing or anything. Yeah, there we go. That worked great. So that's actually a water erasing pin, but because that is in the seam allowance, I'm actually going to try to cut that line off. I don't need to worry about it. I'm cutting that line off as best I can because that tracing something makes your fabric, your piece slightly bigger. Not really enough to matter, but you know, we can all work on probably being better at things. I know I 100% can. So pretty easy. This smaller piece is nice and easy to cut because I can hold it up, which helps with the fabric lipping away from itself. When you have to cut with the surface underneath, it does make it slightly trickier. There's our head piece. And finally, our top fin and flipper, and then we can cut out our eyes. This is a non-directional fabric, so for the top fin and flipper, I can just fold it over, which I like because I like to save fabric. So the only difference with this is we only need one top fin, which is 2 pieces. But because our sardine is double-sided, we need 4 of these because we need 2 pieces per flipper. The nice thing is with this one, you can 100% use your rotary cutter. And if any of you have made my geese, you know you can use your rotary cutter for cutting out those pieces as well. I apologize that I forgot to share that. But you can't use a ruler, so it's just free motion rotary cutting. And if you're not comfortable with that, just go slow or practice on something that doesn't have to be as precise. So there's our top fin, 2 pieces cut out right side together for that. The nice thing about the flipper is that you could cut it out 4 at a time. So if I go like that, put that on top of this, I can cut out all 4 of those pieces on my non-directional fabric at one time. And I don't typically recommend that. Like I wouldn't recommend cutting out both eyes at the same time. 4 layers is a lot, but because it's small, I just throw my fabric to the side. You can maneuver it by picking it up, and I can even cut out that first side with a rotary cutter. And then being able to pick it up helps you keep those layers together and keep your scissors nice and perpendicular. The problem with cutting out multiple layers at a time is often that we tend to angle our scissors, and therefore one layer can end up smaller than the other. But because this is small enough and you can pick it up like that, you can keep your scissors more straight and cut them all out at once, which is awesome. Time-saving tips, right? So there's our two flippers. Both have two pieces, right sides together. Okay, so we do have to cut our eyes real quick, but just in case, I wanted to just show you if I was making a one-sided sardine and I had cut out all of my pieces with my pattern right side up. So that would be the same three pieces, but I would only have to cut one of each. I would then take my full body piece, do the same thing, pin, and I'll actually do it because then I can show you the rotary cutter, and I can use this for a different sardine because it is printed in the reverse of those pieces. So as long as all of your pieces are placed on right side up fabric with the piece right side up, the pattern piece, you will be just fine. So if you're cutting out with a rotary cutter, this one I'm just going to kind of cut out real quick because it's just a little bit easier to maneuver that way. I didn't iron this piece either, so do what I say, not what I do. I like to start kind of where I can kind of roll in, and then I'm just keeping my fingers to help hold that pattern down against the fabric so I get a nice cut. I'm going slow, and I'm just keeping my blade to the side of the paper, and the paper kind of gives a little bit of a lip to work with. You do want to be careful not to cut into the paper because we don't want to cut off any portion that will hinder the pattern. And I don't quite go to the ditch because I keep hitting the foot of my tripod, so I apologize again. I don't go quite into the ditch because we don't want to overcut. That's the other thing to just be careful of as you're cutting into these ditches. Just be careful. So you won't be able to do the whole thing by rotary cutter, but you can then go in and just finish that off. If you have like the little rotary cutter, what is it, a 30 millimeter? I think this is 60. You might be able to go around that curve and then just finishing off that cut to the edge with scissors, and then you can easily just cut down the side of the pattern here. The rotary cutter, when I cut with a rotary cutter, I just tend to go slightly farther, and then I end up cutting into those ditches, and that's not the best. Again, I do like that I can kind of move around a piece better when it's detached from the big fabric. I've never actually tried to rotary cut where I've drawn the line of the pattern and removed the pattern. I actually kind of like having the edge of the pattern as a little bit of a lip to guide. So there, that's how you cut out the big guy, just in case, since I didn't show that, since the 24-inch was already cut out, but I wanted to do that real quick. If you wanted to make a single fabric sardine on both sides, you could just flip this over and cut out another one with fabric right side up, or flip your fabric upside down. So I'll set that aside for a different sardine. Goodness knows I'm making loads of sardines lately. Okay, so eyes. I like to use felt. Like I said, it does not fray, which is awesome. A wool blend felt is wonderful. Benzie sells wool blend and 100% wool felt. So you can choose either. I find you can wash the wool blend. I don't know how well like acrylic felt washes, so that's something to keep in mind if you're ever gonna launder this. I don't know that you would, but maybe. I am just pinning them directly on to my giant felt piece, kind of getting them close to like a little edge because I just cut like lots of little bits. For the 36-inch pillow, I need to cut 2 of each. Like I said before, I do not like to cut those at the same time. This is why my edges look weird, because I tend to cut from an edge and then cut around to cut that eye off of the big piece. But you might not have to do that because you might have a smaller piece. And then you could also cut out like a square. It just uses a little bit more fabric so that you already have a piece ready to go, and cut it out fully from a smaller piece. The pattern calls for a smaller piece of felt because that will fit two circles on each piece in case you want to do a two-sided. But I recommend buying like a larger sheet of this because you're going to make more. So it's not perfect. You can see up against the black, and it's up against a darker fabric. So if you're not perfect in cutting, after you're done, just kind of go in and smooth out any edges. It's not going to be really noticeable once it's sewn on. We are going to move on to the next step. Isn't that exciting? Really, this does not take a long time to make. Once you get used to it, you could probably make one in an hour or two. It's just explaining it takes a little bit longer. The first things we are going to do is sew our flippers and our fins. And we're going to do that for each size. Although we'll see I don't think I'll show it for the smaller size for those because they're sewn exactly the same. Maybe I'll show this because we do have some little curves. If you want to prep before you get to the sewing machine, you could pin these right sides together, everything lined up. I don't typically pin stuff like this, but I've been sewing a long time, so I am just comfortable and know my limits. If you think that you could have shifting on your pieces at all, please definitely use pins. Do whatever you are most comfortable with for your sewing. So I will pin for you guys, and I'll pin one of these and I'll not pin the other so you can kind of see the difference. And I'll show you my little tip for getting around these tiny little curves. Okay, let's prep the eyes as well. So for the 24-inch, we have 1, and the 36-inch, we have 2. So what I like to do is kind of lay the pattern piece on top of it, and then holding my fabric and the piece, I'm going to kind of lay it over top where it goes and gently slide out that piece. Well, and then I just lifted it up and it didn't work. And it's more just general idea of where it goes. You can really place it anywhere you want. Just remember that you have a 1/4-inch seam allowance, as well as when you stuff it, the seam curves up a little bit. So there's a little bit of dimension to it. It's not just going to be sitting flat. So that's why using the pattern for placement is ideal. For the bigger guy, same thing, kind of holding and then sliding it out. So the other trick is going to be the other side because you have to do it backwards. So if you're just flipping the pattern over, you can definitely see the eye through there and do it that way. But you probably wouldn't be able to see the eye through the fabric with the pattern upside down. Another way that I've done it before is I put my eye set upside down on top of that eye set, place my fabric upside down on top, just making sure all my edges are aligned, and kind of pinch them together to put them in place. So however works for you, but using the placement from the pattern is going to give you a very nicely placed eye once the sardine is fully stuffed. Okay, here we are at our machine, and I think we'll sew the top fin first. Let's start with the 36-inch size. Hopefully this vantage point will work for you, but I'll switch it up for the second so that we can get a different view. So you're gonna wanna start in, it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we have a 1/4 inch seam allowance for everything in the pattern. So wherever a 1/4 inch ends at this line that's kind of at an angle, that's where you wanna start. Remember to back stitch. So I do a couple stitches and then I back stitch. And I like to keep my stitch length at 2 because it's big enough you can unpick it easily, but small enough that it gives you a stronger seam, in my opinion. So I am just going to, I lost my pin cushions. I'm going to sew up to where I'm just about under that point, or about a 1/4 inch away from my next line. I'm going to put my needle down if it doesn't already go in the down position. It did. And I'm going to pivot, and then I'm going to come down this way, taking my pin out. And I'm going to back stitch at the end there. So I have a nicely sewn piece. Then I'm going to just clip off this corner because it's just extra fabric I don't need. And I don't want to clip the seam. I just want to clip off the extra fabric because as we turn it, it will kind of be in the way. And I like to kind of clip it at an angle. We want that fabric to kind of be in. And then I also like to clip off this top point so there's less bulk. Once those seams turn inward, you can see it's pretty close to the seam, but there's still definitely fabric there because we do not want to clip that seam. And then I'm going to turn this right sides out. And I do like to press it after I turn it because it gives me just a nicer finish and helps those edges stay together. So we have that edge. We're just kind of smoothing out. And I will go press this, but yeah, we just kind of want to smooth out the edges, make sure there's no like extra fabric along the seam tucked in. So if you want to, if you feel more comfortable this way, you could do a quick basting stitch along those bottom edges. You don't have to back stitch. It could be a bigger stitch, but keep it really close to the edge, and it just holds those two layers together so that when you're sewing it into the fish, you don't have to worry about one of those layers like flipping up or pulling away. And if you have any of this extra seam coming down after you iron it and turn it right side out, just clip it off. Not a big deal. Just clip it away. So let's take a different view for this smaller one because might be a little bit easier. Okay, you have a little bit better view here. Harder view for me, but I will make it work. So I'm just doing that back stitch when I start. My edge of my foot is not a 1/4 inch, but that would be my best recommendation is if you have a machine with an actual 1/4 inch foot. This is supposed to be a 1/4 inch foot, but it is a little bit different because it is, I think, millimeters instead of inches. I might have that completely wrong. Millimeters? Yeah, I think millimeters. And I did the pivot. I didn't talk about it. And I went down there. So then I'm going to just trim that back, clip off my point, trim that back, and we're going to turn it and press it. But there's our piece. This spoonflower fabric is older. I haven't ordered my spoonflower fabric in a little bit, and it is definitely crisper, and I don't really see that I need to iron this, so I'm just gonna pop my basting stitch right along the bottom there. And again, I do have a few little pieces that I could trim off, but I'm not really overly concerned about those. Okay, there is our 24-inch top fin. Okay, now we have our flippers. This one is going to be a little, this is our 36-inch flipper. If you are doing these the same fabric on both sides and it's non-directional fabric, you can just sew them both in the exact same way and go around, no big deal, turn them right side out, because one goes in like this and the other on the other side will go in like this. If for some reason you fussy cut this or are directional, you do want to make sure that you have them in opposite ways. So like that side faces the sardine on each one. Just a little tip that might have helped during cutting as well, but I don't really know that you would fussy cut these, but people surprise me all the time. So this is a very small curve and you want to keep a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I do is I kind of use my lever to slowly like lift my foot and pivot my fabric with my hand every stitch or so to kind of get around that curve. If you just let the fabric go with the feed dogs, because these edges are cut on like kind of the bias because they're not going with the grain of the fabric, you could end up with a little bit of skewed fabric, like it'll like pull out of place. Another way to do it is usually on a machine, the pressure of your presser foot, this is your presser foot, and the pressure down to the plate of the machine can be adjusted. I have this right up here, and this allows for less pressure or more room, so I can adjust how tightly that holds to the plate so the fabric can go through easier or not so easy. So you might have that on your machine too, and if you reduce that foot pressure, you may be able to swing those tiny little curves easier. But I like this method of pivoting and just lifting and pivoting because I feel like it's faster than adjusting things and can give us a nice curve around. So let's take the pin out. This one, before we turn, we are doing some clipping around the curves. Now this is necessary because all this seam allowance has to go inside that seam once it's turned, and it'll pull. I'll actually turn it right side out without clipping it, and you can see what it looks like because it won't look as good. So I highly recommend not skipping this step. It's hard to get this all out without some sort of stick. I like to use a dull pencil because unless it's a very light fabric. So you see how we can see those stitches, and that curve is a struggle for me to get that curve to be nice because it's just pulling back into those sections. Okay, so fully out flat again probably would be best if I ironed it, but I didn't. So I'm going to clip in that ditch of the curve, and I'm not going to clip all the way up to the seam, but it's pretty close. You want to leave a few threads of fabric there because you don't want it to like pull apart. And then every about 1/4 inch, I'm going to clip into that curve, and I'm not going to go quite as far as that clip in the ditch because we just want this to help ease the fabric around those curves. I have noticed with these ditches, sometimes it helps to do an additional little cut. So it's almost like a triangle there. Can you kind of see that where I cut 2 additional little lines to give a triangle? Those ditches just like to hold on to that fabric. And so let's turn that. Another trick that I like to do is if you open it like this, you can easily poke this through and turn it. It's easier to turn that way than to try to open the base of it and pull up through there. So let's just get these smoothed right out here. Okay, so those popped up so much better. You can see the little stitch in the ditch there, but it's not quite pulling as much. And once I go iron this, that will help me to like really smooth out those curves. Okay, I just pressed it real quick so it looks nicer. I'm gonna do my quick little base the edge, that little tab, I'm gonna just clip off. So there you go, there is your flipper. So you're done if you are only doing a one-sided, one flipper type of sardine. I'm gonna show you without a pin and then I'll do the little one real quick, but it's basically exactly the same. So I'll just kind of sew through and let you watch if you choose. My machine will keep sewing if I just lift up that foot a tiny bit. Your machine may not. I'm not lifting it up a ton. Like it's not the full height by any means. That might be why it still sews, but just keep that in mind. You may have to fully stop. Not too bad. I didn't have any pulling or anything. That often happens with no pins. I took the pin out of this because it's a lot smaller, so I'm just going to run into it a lot easier. This fabric is much less, like, I guess, I don't know, it just seems a little bit stiffer, sturdier, so I can kind of pull on this and do those curves without it, like, pulling out of shape easier. So that's something to consider if you're using a different style of fabric. You might have to not have to do all the pivoting. The 24-inch flipper is a lot smaller, so just keep that in mind. So little. You're going to do the exact same, though, and do all that clipping to make sure you get a nice, smooth flipper. This one is a little bit harder, and this is a good spot to use like a little dowel or a pencil to help kind of push that through. I think this fabric is just stiff in general, so it's giving me a harder time than that would have just slid right through on a regular quilting cotton. Just gotta be careful if you're using some leverage that it's not going to poke a hole through your fabric. That's the only thing. So we have our little tiny itty bitty baby flipper. So little. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same on this. You guys don't have to watch that. Okay, so there are our flippers, and I'm gonna take them over and move on to my table and move on to the next step. We are going to sew this white down, and I just do a back stitch. I do like a tiny bit bigger stitch on this because it's so visible, and I do actually do a little bit of the pivoting on this just because I want that eye piece to stay nice and flat on the background piece. And I find that if I'm just letting the fabric guide through without any pivoting, sometimes my fabric can pop up and it can become askew. The main thing you want to do is when you get back to the start, you make sure that you are starting it in a nice circle to the, you're ending it like right where it began, so it gives a nice circle. So now I'm going to stitch this on by hand. So you could do the same thing with the machine and stitch around the inside of the black, just a similar distance from the edge. If you let me move you a tiny bit. If your machine is easy to like switch the thread out on, that's great. Go ahead, do that. Or if you have two machines, or if you don't mind if you have a contest thread in your eyes. I'm actually just doing a stitch every maybe quarter of an inch. I come up here and I go back into the white straight out, and then I come up. So it's kind of like little tick marks around. I know it's so hard to see black on black, and for that, I'm very sorry. You could also do just a straight running stitch. For some reason, I like this stitch for eyes. It's what I do for my bee size too. Sometimes those little details just add to the pattern. You could definitely make the eyes from some sort of fabric that's not felt, but I would probably recommend an applique stitch or a zigzag around the edges then, or multiple rows of stitching, which kind of looks like doodle sewing or sketch sewing, because it's going to fray, especially if this is like a pillow that's going to be used a lot, loved on. You want those edges to be very strong so your eye doesn't go away. So just keep that in mind if you're not using felt to make sure you have nice strong stitching. So there, that's all it really is. I just do a little knot on my back, and you can see kind of the nice stitches as they go around. I always really enjoy turning it over and seeing how nice my stitches look. There is your eye. So however you do it, just topically stitch on the white and then the black, or stitch the black to the white and then stitch the white to the background. So you have a nice eye shape. Okay, we have our heads, our top fin, and our flippers ready to go. So let's get all of our pieces prepped for sewing them on and getting our body pieces sewn on. We can move all of our pattern pieces more out of the way now. All right. So you only need one of your top body pieces for our two-sided 36-inch sardine. But we need, and we'll do our 24-inch in a minute. So basically, you're going to place the top fin along the top edge of the body between these two lines. I just like to keep my pattern piece kind of just aligned with the paper pattern piece. You can also mark these lines in about 1/8 of an inch on the edge. I don't really think that's necessary because you can just line it up. They're not perfectly aligned with this, but as long as you're within them, you are going to sew that on there. And you may have to follow the curve a little bit. You want the top edge of the body piece to be the bottom edge of the fin so that your fin points in towards the body. That's a little bit counterintuitive, so I understand if that's confusing, but that's how it goes. So you can pin that there if you would like. So let's just set that aside. Now we have our flippers and we need to put them on our bottom body piece. And again, I have these just kind of staying aligned with my pattern piece underneath. And you can see I have this little spot for where the flipper goes. And it's just a suggestion. You can really put your top fin or your flipper anywhere, but this is just to kind of give you a suggestion. And you just kind of bring it down from there. You can definitely put it right over and just kind of peek where it goes, but I can just put it kind of down and then just kind of guide it down. So again, just a little bit of a peek. You're going to sew that on to that piece right on top of where you have those stitches. Then you're going to do the same thing for the other side. So you can do it a couple different ways. Lay it on top and lay your other piece right on top and then pin them together. Or you could turn this over, just remembering that you may not be able to see those lines super well through the fabric, and just lay it on top, aligning it, making sure it's pretty even. Ideally, you do want the pin on this side. And just making sure this bottom edge of the flipper aligns with the top edge there. So those are ready to sew on for our 36-inch. Then we're going to just do the same thing for our 24-inch. So same thing again, putting it on top or bottom, doesn't really matter. I do like to stress that the short end of the fin goes towards the front. And just bring that down. The smaller size, you will more than likely have to just curve a little bit along the lines, and that's fine. And then this guy, again, aligning it. Doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of a guide of where that will go. So we're going to go sew these to the pieces, and then we will be ready to sew our top piece to our bottom piece. The only thing you need to remember is to make sure when you're stitching it on, keep it at about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You don't really have to backstitch. I'm just so used to doing it. It just happens. And then as you're kind of going, if there's a little bit of a curve, you can see here my end kind of curves away. So I'm just going to align it. And then as I kind of need to, I'll kind of realign it. So once we sew that seam for our top seam, this will end up on the outside, of course. So that is why it's pointed towards the inside now. Okay, you're going to do the same thing. You shouldn't really have to curve these, just for your putting your flipper on. Again, this is just basting, so you really don't have to backstitch. In fact, I will not backstitch there. And then the same thing. Here's our little 24-inch. Just a tiny little spot to attach I have a flip-flop on, so to cut with my pedal, my machine has that option. It's proving tricky. This one is a little bit more curvy because it's just smaller, so just align it as best you can. Okay, so we have our pieces ready to go, and I'm going to demonstrate on this one, and then we'll show on the big one a different vantage point. So now we have to sew this curve piece. So this is a little bit different. And there's a couple things you can do. You can kind of fold in half. So you make a little crease in the middle and do the same thing here where you put a little crease in the middle so that you're going to align those creases, sew and pin. Now, that's one way that you can do a curve. Pin in the middle, pin at the end, and when you get to the end, from that point, you're going to come in about 1/4 of an inch. Basically, you want your seam to align with how the fin continues. So you're going to want to overlap that point a little bit so that you're ending right where that fin continues. You can pin just in the end there. In the beginning, you don't really need a pin because you're going to start it, but you're going to do the same thing at the beginning where you are overlapping about 1/4 of an inch so that your seam starts right where the back fabric meets the front fabric, like right there in that little ditch. Can you kind of see that? So I like to align those on this end and do my back stitch, of course. And then as you're sewing, your bottom fabric is going to stay flat, and your top fabric you're going to kind of move to align to that curve. And then as you have these pins here, you can kind of get a good idea of how much fabric you have left to kind of make sure if you need to pull it at all, you can do that. When you get to the pin, take out the pin, and then you're going to do the same thing. See how, like, if I pulled it straight, this doesn't line up. We need that curve to match that curve. So in order to do that, we have to kind of zhuzh this. And we don't want to really tug on the purple because that's going to be the one that stretches more, the bottom fin. We want to kind of be moving the blue to kind of fit on top of the purple. And until you get right up to the end, it may not seem like it's going to fit, but it definitely ends up fitting most of the time. So then we have that nice curved seam. I like to iron the bottom towards the top just because the top tends to sometimes have those ripples, and I guess it doesn't really matter, but that also, ironing the bottom towards the top, allows the fin to lay more flat because the fabric of the fin, you can see here, is going in the same direction it's laying here. If I was to iron the seam down, watch what happens. It wants to flip the fin up. So you could avoid that by just ironing it down, maybe even top stitching a little, but I tend to flip the bottom, here, let's put it like this. The bottom, iron it up towards the top for the seam. And then you definitely want to iron it because it will give it a nice smooth finish. And we can see how the seam just kind of continues into the edge of the fin here and gives a nice smooth look there. So keep that in mind. Okay, what's next? Let's do that with both pieces from the 36-inch. So I have to grab the other top piece because only one of the top pieces has the fin, but the other top piece is needed for this part too. Okay, we're gonna do a slightly different viewpoint and find the correct piece. So we're gonna sew this to here, and it's a little bit harder to see all of it because it's longer. Let's back up a touch, there we go. So again, this one I'm not gonna pin, and we're gonna see how it comes out and how it flows without pinning it. I'm gonna do the same thing. I like to have this piece on the bottom and this piece folded over to the top. And again, I'm going to align roughly 1/4 of an inch so that I can start my seam right in that ditch. Sometimes as I'm putting it down and shifting, it can shift the tiniest bit. So we just want to make sure. Back stitching, and you can see here, this is how they want to naturally lay. So just want you to see more. Let's the camera is so close to me, so I'm going to try not to bump it. So as I'm sewing and keeping 1/4 of an inch, I'm trying to like ease these together so that the fabric aligns. And I have definitely gotten to the end and it doesn't quite meet. So you do want to keep that in mind. I'm trying not to pull this one, and I'm trying to like stretch the top one, if any. And even until the last minute here, I'm like, is it gonna fit? And then it does pretty much always seem to fit. If at the end you have need a little bit of stretch, that's fine. And then we have a nice smooth seam. So it matches up at the beginning and goes pretty much, lines up pretty well at the end. Maybe a little bit shallow, but as long as it's less than 1/8 of an inch, I don't really need to worry about that. Again, I want to iron that so that the bottom seam allowance goes to the top. But first, I've got to do the top one. This one's a little bit trickier because it's backwards. So you're either going to put this on the top and go from the same side. So you could definitely do that. What I tend to do is keep my bottom piece on the bottom and start from this side. And that way you can overlap. You've got a nice little guide there to overlap, and you can sew from this side. So let's get that lined up well and see what we can do. Again, if you wanted to do the trick we did with a 24 where you fold in half and pin on both ends and in the middle, that's probably the best way to do it if you are a new to curves sewist. But because the curves are on the bias of the fabric, which means they just stretch more. So that is like one thing that you definitely need to keep an eye on. And I do like to keep an eye on this end to make sure. So at the very least, I would probably more often than not pin these together. So I kind of just get an idea of how much I need to stretch things. I have also heard somebody use glue, like a EPP basting glue to actually glue them together along the curve. Okay, a little bit different vantage point. So we are going to put the head on next, and we have another curve for the head. And again, you can do the same thing where you can do a little crease in the middle. It's a little bit harder to get that exact middle with the eye, and align those creases. And the ends, you could definitely try a little bit of glue to glue those on, or just wing it. So we're going to try a couple different ones. I did want to share just how nicely the flipper lays when you are ironing your bottom piece seam allowance towards the top. And if we were to iron that seam allowance towards the bottom, if I flipped that, the flipper would tend to want to go up, which that's another look. You could definitely do that, or you could top stitch it down. But the easiest way is just to iron the seam allowance towards the top so that the flipper stays that way. And you can see here that I have one section and head going that way, one section and head going this way, the same, and then the back piece for the one-sided 24 inches going the opposite way. Just a good thing to keep an eye on as you are making. You can see all my sardines lined up there. They're so fun. Back to the sewing machine. Okay, for this first option, I did the crease in the middle, and I'm going to line that up. Just putting a pin in. And this one is definitely more of an exaggerated curve. So I think I'm going to let that sit because it's going to be a little bit trickier to pin, but you could, again, 1/4 of an inch in wherever that hits. And just so you know, I was looking for my ruler. You can measure in 1/4 of an inch. I have a little ruler here on my sewing machine, so just put a little mark there. So you can kind of see my little pencil mark there. That's 1/4 of an inch in. So wherever that 1/4 of an inch mark is, you want it to line up with this edge of the point over here so that we get a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You could definitely pin it to get it there because it does tend to want to move. And because I want this to follow the edge of the curve on the bottom, I'm just going to kind of use my fingers to guide it. Like I said, this is definitely a more exaggerated curve, so just take it slow. I don't like this pin method as much. It just doesn't feel as natural to me. And I'm not even a person who sews curves a ton. Once you get to the pin in the middle, and you can kind of see as this is starting to lip up, but as I'm trying to meet this curve along the edge. This is a woven on top, so this might not have been my best choice because the woven has more give than a non-woven. But I'm just going slow, slowly meeting my edges, and then as I get close to the end, I can see, oh yeah, I'm getting pretty darn close. Woven might not be the best choice to start with, like I said, just because it does tend to want to pull more. So then there is our curved edge. It's pretty good. It's a little bit off on this side, and I think that's due to the woven. What I'm going to do for that, because I do want my edges to be pretty even, is just kind of trim it like that, and I think it'll be fine. So our next one is in reverse. So it's basically just upside down. This curve is pretty close to symmetrical. So whatever you do, it's probably going to be about the same. I'm not going to pin it this time, and I'm going to see what we get because I think it might be okay without pinning. Again, with the woven, a little bit questionable. One thing you can do is put a larger basting stitch on so that you can baste it first, make sure it gets to be where it's supposed to be, and then you can go back over it with a regular stitch once you get everything aligned well. I actually feel like that went better for me. So that was just basted, and you can see it definitely curls up a little bit. Part of that is the basting stitch, but also once you lay it flat, it flattens out nicely. So then I would put my stitch back down to what I use is a 2, and this is more work, yes, but if you are newer to curves or want to practice more, that's a good option for you. Just trying to stitch right on top of that or just to away from the edge so that you're gonna get a nice finished looking seam. Don't forget to backstitch. And again, once you iron this, I iron this seam towards the front. It's going to be nice and smooth there. And of course, this is upside down, so just remember that. Okay, our last little guy. The littler the curve, I find it the harder to pin. So I'm going to try free form again. This is a non-woven fabric. I mean, technically it is woven. It's just not like a woven. So as you can see, just as it's pulling the fabrics, I'm trying to pull the pink towards the bottom piece here to align those edges. And this one might be a little shy. Well, we might get there. See how it's like, oh, is that going to reach? Sometimes it just surprises me when I actually get to the end. And it does, yeah, that was actually perfect. So part of it is just trusting the process, even though it looks like it's not going to fit. There is that. I do have a little bit of puckers, but I think the iron will iron that out just fine. And just go slow, take your time with those curves. And I think you'll be surprised that they are easier than they feel. So I'm going to go iron these and then I'll meet you back at the cutting table. Okay, we are back and you have gotten through the hardest part. There's a couple things I want to mention. That if you have any bowing in this or the seam where it feels like the fabric is kind of pulling and pushing up, I feel like maybe here it does it just a tiny bit. Don't worry, because once it's stuffed, that shape kind of bows and it'll fill out. So if it's not perfectly flat, like sitting here, if it's not perfectly flat, that's okay, because once you stuff it, it'll kind of fill out that space. The other thing I just want to mention is if you have tags. To me, this is a rather tricky pattern to do tags because there's not a great spot for it. On the goose, I ended up doing under the wing, which I have done that. I have tags like this. It's a ribbon tag and you fold it in half and that goes at the seam. So on one or two of the sardines, this guy has a tag there. And I've done it, I think, where my logo is here or it's here. I don't love that, but that is the best in terms of hiding it. You could also put it along the bottom and have it then stitched to the side. Or if you wanted to topically stitch it, sometimes I will cut off a bit of this and then I topically stitch around all four and put it, you know, like down here or something. Especially if it's a one-sided sardine, you could for sure do that, like on the back, just put it down here somewhere. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention. If you're making these to sell, you are definitely welcome to. In a cottage industry type business, one-person production, you can make these and sell them with credit of this pattern to me. But where to put the tag, actually right there could be cute too if it's double-sided, but that is just something to consider where I don't like to see the tag, but I like to have it there if I'm going to sell these. So just something to consider. The next step is pretty simple. You're putting these guys right side together, aligning all the edges. I do pin because I like to make sure that this edge specifically is really well aligned, because it's going to be that right there and you want that to look very nice. And then on the bottom as well, You want those to be very well lined up. You could press one seam in and one seam out so you can nest those seams. And then just pin however much you want around to keep things pretty well aligned. Your tail, keeping things aligned is key. As you may notice, I'm not really putting my pins except for in that conjunction. Is that the right word? That junction. I'm putting them in everywhere else because I don't really want to have to worry about throwing them out. The other thing to think about when you're sewing is your flipper, making sure I like to tuck them up. So kind of tucking them up, and you could pin them that way. But as you're going over where the flipper is, just making sure you're not catching the bottom of that flipper. You probably would miss it on this one, but on the little one, it gets a little bit closer from my experience. You're going to do the same thing, whatever size you're sewing. So just pin, lay on top, pin in place. Like you can see if you have a single fabric back, that it's a little bit less worrisome to align. You don't have to really align anything. The other thing is, if for some reason one of your pieces, either your front or back, ends up being slightly smaller, no big deal. Just sew with this smaller piece on top so that you can go in 1/4 inch from that edge. Because if you end up going in 1/4 inch from the back piece that might be slightly bigger, you might miss catching some of this. And that just happens based on your seam allowance when piecing. Varies per machine. So if you had a slightly larger, smaller seam allowance, one of your pieces can end up slightly bigger, but it shouldn't be a problem. Like I said, just sew with the smaller piece on top. The last thing to do is to note where to leave open. And because this is upside down, I can see the marks through. Often what I'll do, you can just throw a little mark with a marker on there, just making sure it stays within the seam allowance, or put 2 pins, start here, stop there, backstitch. So it took me a minute. I lost my pattern piece. I found it. Again, this is upside down just to fit the shape of the little guy. And you can just do, here's one of my marks there, here's one of my marks there. If you need to leave your opening a little bit bigger, totally fine. This one fits my hand through it. This one almost. It is ideal to keep your hand, have enough space for your hand to go through. If you need to make it a little bit bigger, go towards the front of the sardine, like up there, not towards the tail of the sardine. So really, all we have to do from here is sew around, do our clipping of our seams, and turn it and stuff it and sew it up. It's pretty quick. So I will take you through sewing around one of these to show you just to go around these shapes. And then I think you can imagine the same thing for the little guy. And then we'll stuff them together. Okay, we are going to start our seam where we have the little opening marks. It's very hard to tell on this because it's blue on blue, but I have a little marking there that tells me the start of where my opening needs to be. So that's where I'm going to start, 1/4 inch seam allowance per usual, and backstitch at the beginning and end. These are curves, but these are not the same type of curves as this curve. You basically just have to keep the edge of your fabric at 1/4 inch seam allowance and go around the shape of it. Go slow if you're not used to this sort of work. Take your time. My machine is extra fast, so Juki goes at a faster tick. When you have to go around this curve, you may have to do a little bit of pivoting. Kind of depends. I'm going to pivot a little bit because it's the woven fabric and I don't want it to like bow or warp the fabric at all. So I'm just taking my time around that curve because it's a little bit smaller, especially if you're doing the 24 inch be wary. Just making sure with my fingers as I come across that seam that it's pretty darn even. I don't let a little bit of things being off like that bother me in stuffies. But you might get bothered by that. So just something to keep in mind. I just was double checking that that's nicely lined up because I'm going to get down here and I'm going to pivot at this point. When I got to about 1/4 of an inch away from that little ditch, I'm going to pivot and turn. Be very careful along these edges on the tail fin because they are all cut against the grain or on a bias. Basically, it will warp if you are not being careful to not like pull the fabric. So the same thing with the curve here. If you need to, definitely stop and pivot. As you can see, my whole hand is on here because that helps put pressure, keeping the two nicely held together. And sometimes if you don't have that full pressure, it can just pull the fabrics away from each other, or the warp of the fabric can just skew it. Like I said in a different part of the video, just keep an eye if you can adjust the pressure on your presser foot. That's something to think about. So I'm just taking a look at where my mark is for my leave open, and that's where I'm going to end with the back stitch. So make sure to take out all your pins, and then we're going to do some clippings. Let's pull you in. So you want to do a clip in the ditch on each side, and then in this little ditch right there. And then I like to do that same kind of tick mark, like extra clip on that ditch, and then just do my little every 1/4 to 1/2 inch around. You can see I'm cutting at an angle here. That's totally fine. And this point, I do like to cut off that point as well. This is, again, to ease those curves around the end so it gets a nice smooth finish. And then clipping that off. You can see there's still plenty of thread there and fabric so that it won't pull. The only other place I clip on the outside of the sardine is around the nose, just because it's a little bit more intense of a curve. I don't clip on any of the curves of the long body. It doesn't seem to need it. Okay, so let's actually go to the ironing board, and I'm going to turn it and show you what I do next. Okay, sorry you can't see my head, but I wanted you to have a little bit closer view of the sardine. So it's all sewn up, all clipped. This is the opening, and you're literally just going to kind of pull through that opening, kind of scrunching up and pulling all the way through. It helps if you have some sort of a dowel. Some bags of stuffing come with a dowel, or you can buy them at your local craft store. You can use a long pencil. Just make sure it's blunt. That helps you kind of push out the corners of the tail, swoop kind of around that curve. Other corner, curve. Anything that's blunt but sharp will help you get those out. Does that make sense? I like to press this before I iron, and to do that, I want to make sure that all the seams are fully pushed out to the edge, because I feel like pressing it first helps the shape as you're stuffing, you could probably forego this and it'd be fine, but I tend to do it just making sure. You can kind of see I'm just wiggling my seam so it's even and there's no extra fabric kind of in the crease of the seam. To me, that just helps a little bit, like I said, with stuffing, pulling the top fin up. Whoops, there goes my dowel. And I don't know, I like to see the shape of it. I know a couple people had mentioned they might make this into a door stopper, which I think is a fun idea. And you could actually fill it with some sort of pellet. Beans and rice would work, but you want to make sure it's never going to get wet, because if those get wet, that would be gross. The other thing I like to use the iron for is this opening. I'm doing this backwards, but I like to iron that seam allowance down so that when I go to do my ladder stitch, it's a little bit easier to stitch up. So there is our sardine waiting to get stuffed. I have my little guy too. This is my second tweak of the 24-inch, and don't worry, it's going to be good when you get it. But I was a little disappointed. The top piece was a little bit larger than I wanted it to be once it was done being sewn. So I had a lot of extra fabric, and I feel like my top fin might not be fully as big as it could be. Still there, but it's a little baby fin. That's just part of pattern making. You have to make things multiple times, testing out different aspects of the pattern to get it to be right, because the key is consistency, that the most people can get the same result from a pattern. Hopefully that dowel won't fall. And again, I'm just doing the same thing. You could definitely skip the ironing step if you choose. I just like to have those nice crisp edges. So next we're going to go to stuffing. And really you can stuff this guy as much or as little as you want. You do need to put a little bit more stuffing in the tail and along the nose. It's easier for me to do this when it's facing me. It's just what I'm used to. Okay, so we have two sardines. So yes, like I was saying, the stuffing, it's definitely better to put a decent amount of stuffing in the nose and the tail to just fill all the little corners. But once you get those, you can kind of lightly stuff the rest. The more stuffing you use, while it does get firmer, it also gets more clumped so that it's harder to like grab it and like separate the stuffing. When it's very lightly stuffed, when you grab it, it can separate the stuffing. And most craft store stuffing is not going to be great, like say a Jellycat or a what's those Squishmallows, where the stuffing just kind of like zoop goes back together. I feel like sometimes if stuffing separates, you will get kind of a ditch in it. So I do suggest slightly more firm than super soft. And even if you stuff it more firm, once you get it stuffed, you can squish on it and flatten it out more. So we're going to go stuff at the table, and I will share how I do that. Okay, I'm back. So I thought I would do this way because we are going to test how much stuffing goes into the 36-inch size, because I want to see if a 12-ounce bag will be enough. For some reason, I don't think it will. I also have a big box. I do not expect you to get a 5-pound box of stuffing, but if you are making a lot of them, it might be a good investment. It's not too expensive. I bought this at Michael's. I'm sure you can get it online. And I have stuffed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sardines from this, plus 3 or 4 geese. So if you're gonna make more than 8 sardines, a box might be the more economical choice. It is, okay, that took me a minute to get that knot undone. It is air compressed, so once it opens, it's gonna grow. So just keep that in mind as you are buying a box for storage purposes. I don't remember seeing a dowel in the one in the box, but I noticed the little guy comes with a stuffing tool, which is just a dowel, and it's actually a dowel more like a chopstick with a shaped, so that works great. So really, you're just gonna put some stuffing in. I like to start stuffing the tail and the nose first, and I just do smaller handfuls for the tail, and just kind of use your fingers to maneuver it down into that section. And you want to kind of push smaller amounts of stuffing into the points of the tails to start, just to fill it in. Because if you put a big clump up there, it will not fill that peak very well, and then that will have no stuffing in it. Those are the parts, the tail and the very tip of the nose, that you do want to stuff with smaller clumps to start, so that you can fill that whole section. And you also want to pay attention to the skinniest part of the tail, where the tail joins the body, making sure that it's hard to say like the right terminology, but I kind of like to have the stuffing go up into the tail, but also extend down into like one piece, one clump of stuffing kind of expands into both, because I found that if I completely stuff the tail and then start from here down to stuff the body, for some reason it just like gets a ditch there. So having some span both really helps. It's hard when you start stuffing, you'll kind of get an idea of what I mean. This is why I like a hole that fits my whole hand, because I like to hold a clump to push it all the way up into that nose. So just going clump by clump. I don't want to clump it down too much. As I'm putting it in, I am trying to keep it fluffy, spread out, not like compacting the stuffing too much, because that will make it look lumpier, make it harder to fill the full thing. I do wonder what it would be like to have one of those Build-A-Bear like blowers that blows the stuffing in. I've thought about seeing if I can make one from a shop vac, like buy a brand new shop vac and fill it with stuffing. I think I'd have to get, there is a type of stuffing that I love called Cluster Stuff by Morning Glory Stuffing. It is very hard to come by. Walmart at one time sold it, no longer does. Hobby Lobby at one time sold it, and I'm pretty sure you can still order it off their website, but rarely find it in the store, and sometimes you can find it on Amazon. But I like it because it's little pieces of stuffing and it doesn't really clump. And it would be great for the sardines, I think, but it was not great for the geese when I made the geese, because you need some support in the neck of the goose. So it might not be the best for the sardine either, but you never know. Okay, it does look like a 12-ounce bag. We'll do a 36-inch sardine, no problem, with just a little bit left over. So that's very exciting for you guys. So you could buy a 12-ounce bag and be completely fine if you're just making one sardine. Or you could buy a 24-ounce bag if they have that and make 2 sardines, or buy the big box. Grab some pins. Once I get it stuffed, I just do like to pin up that opening to make sure that the stuffing fills all parts of it, and Then that holds that opening in position for when I ladder stitch it, which we're gonna do right now. But I am gonna stuff my little guy first. Sometimes I use 2 pins, sometimes I use 3 pins, just pin together. So you can see before it's even done that I did flatten it a little bit, so it's more of a flat than fully rounded, like looking at it like that. And it's two-sided, so that's really fun. These guys are so much fun. Let's speed run stuffing this dude. Okay, good news for you is that the 12-ounce bag was just the right amount for the 36-inch plus a 24-inch. I had one tiny clump left, which if I hadn't already pinned this, I could have totally stuffed it in here, but I decided I'd just throw it in my box. So that was fun. There we go. So now we're gonna ladder stitch that baby up, which if you have the written pattern, there is just a video for just ladder stitch. So you made a sardine. Are you excited? I hope you had a lot of fun. We finished our 2 little guys from the video today. I hope you had a lot of fun. I really love this pattern and have had so much fun making it for you guys. I really have been leaning into like the joy of creating lately, trying to just make things that bring me a lot of joy. And patterns can be stressful, and sometimes that takes a little bit of the joy out of it, but I hope that this brings you enough joy that it is worth it for me. So, like I said, please feel free to ask any questions if you have any, and let me know what you think. I would love to hear. As always, I am over on Instagram probably just about daily. You can find me there the most if you need an immediate answer. I hang out here occasionally, and feel free to email me or check out my website, woollypetals.com as well.